Hey, Gator fans, really excited for today. We have our friend Corey Bender back from Gators Online. I appreciate you being willing to hang out. I feel like you are the recruiting expert, and everybody wants to know now. The
I
2026
appreciate it.
class is starting to take shape here. Obviously, we'll have a lot of visits, unofficial visits that happen this spring to get ready for those officials that'll happen over the summer. I want to talk about this class though. There's a lot of kids that'll be coming in. I want your opinion on that, and I kind of want to know what the ceiling is going to be for this class. So I'm going to throw a couple names at you, and you tell me, what Florida's chances are. What are these people that are going to be back for official visits? You just recently wrote about Jabari Barnett, and he's local to Tampa, out of Tampa Bay Tech, a running back. You guys actually have him listed as an athlete, though.
Yeah.
He said he's coming in. He's got a visit scheduled mid-March. Is this somebody you think Florida has a good shot with?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think with his recruitment right now, he has OV set with Penn State and Illinois, but he already said ahead of time, I want to schedule these out of state ones first. Florida, like they've told him, hey, you're the number one running back on our board. A guy they've been kind of recruiting almost for over a year now.
Yeah.
One of the first stops on the road for Jabari Jaluk. So I think Florida definitely has a really good chance. I know with him, he's big on academics. Even when I spoke to him last summer, you hear a lot of kids talk about, hey, I want playing time and this and that. He always, the first thing with Florida would be academics and how well structured they are in Gainesville. And that's something he echoed to me again yesterday. So I know obviously he loves everything Florida has to offer off the field. And then now obviously Jabbar Jaluk is kind of picking up momentum and, contacting him more and more. And I know that was the thing kind of at the end of last year. He mentioned to me, he goes, hey, like I love Florida, but I'm not hearing from him like a lot. And then he kind of recognized, well, hey, I know the 25 class, they're getting most of the attention right now. So I know obviously my time will come. So obviously, since that's all complete, the 25 class, Jabbar Jaluk has really turned up the heat with him. So he's going to wait it out for a while. He's not in no hurry, but I know Florida, they have him on campus for 2 days for a shadow day next month once the dead period is over with. And once that's over with, he's going to set an OV more than likely for June. So I think Florida is one of the more realistic options at running back for sure.
You mentioned that he's the number one running back on Florida's board. How many running backs do you think Florida will take in this class?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that's one in the portal. They didn't target any running backs. I think it's 7 they have on the scholarship right now, so it's a pretty loaded room. I think right now they'll probably take 1, possibly 2, just depending who's on the board. I mean, it's a pretty deep. I mean, this time of year, they have a pretty deep board of guys they're kind of targeting right now. But I think right now, when you look at the board, there's only a few realistic guys. And I think obviously with him, obviously at the top of the board, I think he's the one you have the monster. But Florida continues to offer a lot of guys. They're targeting a lot of kids in Georgia, Alabama. Obviously, there's a few in Florida they're targeting. But I think as of right now, it'll probably be 1. But if they get traction with another one, they could add a second one as well. But I think that's one of the positions Florida feels pretty confident in with obviously Jaden Baugh. You have Treon Webb, who's still a younger guy. You have a lot of guys on the roster with a lot of youth. So I think that's one of the positions Florida's not kind of going overboard with when it comes to high school recruiting.
Now, obviously, a position that Florida is going to want to continue to build momentum on would be offensive line. I feel like, and you've been around a really long time, so you probably have the same feelings that I do. Like, it's been a minute since Florida has had an offensive line that we feel like we can kind of trust, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like we're going into this season and it's actually an advantage, a positive, probably one of maybe top 5 units in college football, offensive line units. Which is a weird feeling as Gator fans because we're always waiting for I don't know, the offensive line liability to pop its head.
Yeah.
But they've got to continue. Part of building that offensive line is continuing to sign large offensive line classes. Tell me a little bit. I'm probably going to butcher his name. Claude, is it Mapumba? How do you
Yeah, so yeah, they just offered him, obviously out of Chicago. Yeah, so they offered him on Sunday.
number one prospect in Illinois, correct? And he's huge.
Yeah, big kid from Cameroon, 6'8", about 6'8", 305 only before his senior year. So he's a big kid.
Now you, like I said, have done this for a very long time. What's your optimal number that you think is a minimum that has to be signed for offensive linemen to kind of continue making sure you have enough bodies there? I'll get right back to the video. But first, I appreciate BetUS for all their support. Just quickly, make sure you are betting with them and use their code YouTube150. That'll get you a 150% sign up bonus on your first deposit. And you'll also get 125% on your next 2 deposits, all up to $2,000. I appreciate BetUS for their support.
Yeah, because last cycle they signed a good amount, but I know this is a pretty deep class. I mean, especially in the state of Florida. It's going to be a very large class. I think probably 3 to 5. I mean, it's going to be a pretty big class. And right now, it's probably when you look at Florida's big board, they probably have the most traction, arguably with offensive linemen. I mean, Chancellor Barclay's a kid out of Orlando, a kid Florida is probably in the top two with. He's a kid they really like, kind of interior guy. A guy Bear McWhorter on the all name team, a kid out of Georgia who was a kid that Florida really likes as well. He came in for a shadow day. DeCoster and Sale both visited him. Billy Napier too. I mean, Chancellor Campbell, Joel Irvin, Johnny Jones. I mean, the list goes on. There's a lot of guys in this class that Florida's probably in a good spot with, and thankfully for Florida, most of them are in the state of Florida. I mean, you look at a kid like Chancellor Campbell. He's 6'8", another big kid out of the St. Pete area. I put a prediction in for Florida last fall when Florida really offered. It's been Florida, Miami, South Carolina. Those have been the main schools mentioned with him. But if he's a kid that wants to go to school for engineering, a really bright kid. I think he has like a 4.0 GPA or even higher. So he's another kid that raised about Florida's academics. So he's one kid. He's going to need a little bit of time. He was kind of a long-term guy. It kind of needs to kind of fill out the position more, fill out as far as his size and strength. But he's a guy Florida's in a good spot with. And I think another guy to kind of look at too is I mean, you could probably get Sam Rosenborough, another kid out of the Tampa Bay area, out of Clearwater. He's a guy Florida likes as a guard and tackle. They think he can play both spots. Top 100 kid overall with on three. Another kid Florida has kind of been in the hunt for almost a year, and it's kind of all paying off now that they turned up the heat with the 26 class in the spotlight. So I think if you're a Florida fan, you have to be pretty optimistic. I mean, there's a long list of guys that are in the mix for. And then you obviously have Manny the Nacho, the 5-star offensive tackle up in Maryland,
Yeah.
who's probably the most physically imposing offensive line prospect I've ever seen in high school, like up close. The kid's massive, and you kind of look at him. When we're on campus, we're interviewing him outside, and you have Florida's roster. Some of the kids walking by, and he was bigger than some of the offensive linemen on Florida's roster now. A really bright kid. I think when we spoke to him, Florida was like his number 6 school, but I think a lot of that, Florida's on the rise with them. A lot of that's Jonathan DeCoster. He went and visited him on the road. They got him up for a campus visit. Now he's going to come back in the spring, and he wants to see, Rob Sale and DeCoster's coaching style, and then from there, he hopes to schedule official visit. But I think there's some room to make up there. But I think with the way Florida finished out the season, if it wasn't for that, I don't think Florida would have got another visit from him. So Georgia and Oregon are the schools that monitor the most with him. But that's on the wish list. I know that's the guy at the very, very top of Florida's board that, if they landed him, he's one of those day one type of guys.
Um, all right, let's take a little step back from offensive line. Quarterback, we've got Will Griffin, obviously, and he is also from the Tampa area. He's a solid Gator. He was raised in orange and blue. Are we going to get some targets for him? Who is Florida looking at wide receiver wise?
Yeah, then it's another position in the state of Florida. It's like state of Florida for 26 is a loaded class overall. I mean, Jabari Brady, he's a kid out of the Fort Lauderdale area that they're really putting the full court press on. He even said a few months ago that he already feels like he's part of the team. Like he's that comfortable with Coach Gonzalez, Coach Napier. So that's a guy I think, Miami's in the mix for being the local team. He played in the Navy All American Bowl, so he has a lot of big time suitors after him. But Florida's probably right up there in the top 2, top 3 range, possibly number 1. I mean, that's how high they are with him. Marion Wingo, that's a kid out of St. Augustine. He was Billy Gonzalez's first stop on the recruiting trail back in January when coaches got on the road. 6'4", about 190 pounds, and a guy that Florida's really been prioritizing. He attended almost every home game last year. So if you're looking at, they always say track the visits and recruiting. So you got to feel pretty optimistic with that. Florida State just offered. You have Miami too. So he's a guy I think Florida's probably trending for right now, but we're far from over with that. He's going to take his visits, but a few other ones too. Naeem Burrows, Jacksonville Bulls. He's a kid that Under Armour All-American, more of a shifty slot guy that he said Florida was kind of setting the pace in his recruitment back at the Under Armour All-American game. So another guy, Billy Gonzalez, is kind of in the hunt for. And another one too, Jabari Riggins, another Fort Lauderdale kid. He has Florida in his top 3, 6'4", big target. I think it's Florida, Miami, and Kentucky, I believe, for his top 3. So I think out of that group, Naeem Burrows and Samarian Wingo, I think I'm comfortable in saying Florida's probably the school trendy for both of them. And then Jabari Brady and Riggins, they're definitely within the top 3 range. So another group that Florida has a really good chance of kind of finishing off on a high note later in the cycle.
Let's talk the other side of the ball a little bit. Florida has been kind of after four-star linebacker Shadarius Tootle, who is an Auburn commit, but he has a really good relationship with Ron Roberts. Do you think that there's a flip possible there? And what does UF need to do to solidify that?
Yeah, no, I think he hasn't visited Florida before. So I think the biggest thing is just getting down to campus. And like you said, the connection with Ron Roberts is everything. He highlighted that saying, he came to come see me at school, but I wasn't there. And then he came back again to make sure he had that FaceTime with them. And that made a big impression on his family. So they said, hey, let's get down to Gainesville. Will they set an OV for the summer? Possibly he comes back he comes in the spring before that to kind of get more familiar ahead of that OV. But I think the biggest challenge with him is, he's been to Auburn around a dozen times, so he's very comfortable at Auburn. It's only a few hours from his home. But he's also a kid. He's going to take a lot of OVs. I know, obviously, he's going to go to Michigan, Baylor, Florida's OV, and then Auburn. So I got the vibe talking to him that he's pretty open to all these schools. He wants to feel that family feeling, so, that family like feel from all these coaches. He's getting that from Ron Roberts. So I think with him, it's just getting him down the campus. And we all know one visit can change everything. And obviously, all these schools can recruit well during the offseason, but say Auburn kind of stumbles out the gate during the season, maybe that opens the door. We saw that this past cycle with Florida, with the way they finished. They finished maybe second or third for a lot of kids, but then once the season they ended on a high note, they kind of surged up on their list with a lot of them. So I think right now you got to feel confident for Auburn holding on, but he's definitely keeping the door cracked open. And Florida is one of those schools that's reaching out nearly every day.
Who else should we be looking at on our defensive hot board here?
Yeah, I think too. I mean, sticking with linebacker, Isaiah Williams, Under Armour All-American kid out of Tavares, out of the Central Florida area. The kid's a beast, man. I know a lot of people have looked at his recruitment that he's already made 3 commitments. So he's been to Louisville, Syracuse, and Florida State. So he was going to actually commit to Florida in the fall. Yeah, no, I know, right? Dominoes with this kid. He was going to commit to Florida in the fall, and Florida decided to kind of pump the brakes because they're like, we can probably, he grew up a big Florida fan. So they felt like, hey, we can kind of wait this out.
Sure.
He's made 2 commitments already. Let's kind of just get a better relationship with him. And he committed to Florida State. And then, once Florida State kind of had not the best season, he decommitted not long after that. And now Florida was right. They're right back in the hunt with him. He had over 120 tackles last year. Imposing kid, a tall linebacker, Under Armour All-American. So Alabama's in the mix. You got Miami. He says Alabama's number 1 over Florida at 2, but I don't really look much into that. I think if Florida continues pressing for him, I think he could very well be a Gator. So he's a guy I think you definitely got to look at. And then Malik Morris is another in-state kid out of Lakeland. Obviously, the school Florida's had a lot of success with. I think Florida and Miami, you got to look at them as the front runners. I know Miami recently lost Derek Nicholson, their linebackers coach in Missouri. So I think that helps Florida a little bit more, kind of solidifying them at the top. But I think, that could be another really strong linebackers class. It kind of reminds me when they got Miles Graham and Aaron Childs a few cycles ago. Those are 2 big linebacker targets. And the way the board looks right now, as long as they chip away, they can kind of have similar success in this cycle as well.
What do you think is a realistic ceiling for this class?
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, you got to look Florida every year. I mean, look at the way, no one would have thought the way they finished last year, and the season was kind of up and down. Obviously, they finished on a good note, but they still kind of landed right around the top 10, a little bit higher depending on which site you're looking at. But now people knowing Billy Napier's coming back, the hype around DJ Lagway, I think I think you can get the top 5 class. I mean, maybe at the back end of the top 5, maybe between 5 and 10 as well. It just really depends. I mean, because you look at the board right now, only 2 commitments, but it's different in the NIL era. You have a lot of these kids where they want to take these OVs. They compare, obviously, NIL offers, all these different visits. Where back before you
would OV.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, then before you would have maybe like nowadays, like Will Griffin's an exception, right? Because he grew up a big time Gator fan. So with him, it's a little bit different. But a lot of these kids have all these schools kind of leveled out at the top, and they want to kind of do the comparison. So I think once we get into the spring and June, you can see Florida's class really start to expand more and more. But when you look at it right now, they're in a good spot for a lot of top kids. We didn't really talk much about the D line yet, but Vondi Cleveland, Kendall Gervil, and James Johnson, those are 3 guys that Florida arguably is maybe trending for right now, especially for the Fort Myers kids, Gervil and James Johnson. So they're both high 4-star kids, and when you start stacking those 4 stars up, a lot of good things can happen. So I think it could be a very high ceiling class for sure.